Why does a single American state make the entire European continent look like a toy set left out in the rain? Stick around for the next few minutes, hit like right now, and follow along, because this comparison only gets more unbelievable from here. Countless European travelers land back home convinced their own countries are grand, only to feel their whole worldview collapse the moment they're standing in it again. Paris suddenly looks like a diorama. London suddenly looks like a stage set. Rome suddenly looks like a museum replica of itself. That's because none of their brains had ever been flattened by the sheer industrial scale of the American machine. Wave after wave of European tourists come home and are hit with the sinking realization that their beloved homeland now resembles a miniature model you'd find under a Christmas tree. Many of them experience, for the very first time, the sickening sensation of learning that a 7-hour domestic hop from San Diego to New York actually eats up more time than the transatlantic crossing back to London. The centuries of quiet European self-assurance buckle instantly the moment they're confronted with 4-liter jars of pickles, stadiums packed with 100,000 screaming fans, or a pickup truck so wide it swallows the entire street. And there it is, the ugly truth nobody wants to admit. Europe is a patchwork of separate little nations, while America functions like an entire universe crammed into one flag. It's time to stop pretending otherwise. Come with us as we break down exactly how the size of America could physically absorb an entire old-world continent and barely notice. Most of us have been lied to by the classroom map hanging on the wall. That flattened, wall-mounted version of Europe convinces every kid it's looking at something enormous and mighty. But out here in the real world, America owns the concept of land, and the old continent is reduced to a scale model toy sitting next to it. The moment a European tourist steps off the plane back home, the geographical gut punch lands hard. Consider this brutal little number: 7. Put your foot down and drive the length of Texas alone, and you will burn more hours behind the wheel than it takes to cross 7 entire European nations back to back: France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Luxembourg, Austria, and Switzerland. There's one fact I always pull out whenever someone refuses to believe how enormous this country really is. Someone who's never set foot here, and it's this one right here. And honestly, it still messes with my head, even though I've lived it myself. Picture driving straight through France, then Belgium, then the Netherlands, Germany, Luxembourg, Austria, and finally Switzerland. 7 separate countries, and clocking the total driving time. Now take that same number of hours and try to drive across Texas instead. You still wouldn't make it to the other side. You genuinely would not make it. How is that even possible? And remember, that's a single state. I bring that fact up constantly whenever I need to prove how massive this country actually is. Cross 7 whole European countries by car, match that exact travel time inside Texas alone, and you still come up short of the state line. What? What? And that's just one of 50 states, people. What? If that number alone doesn't convince you of the scale we're talking about, nothing will. I mean it. Absolutely nothing will. It's genuinely deranged. Ask a European whether the United Kingdom feels grand compared to the States, and the numbers alone will humble them. There are 11 separate American states, each one individually large enough to swallow the entire foggy island whole. And we haven't even gotten to the final boss yet: Alaska. 11 US states, combining land and water, each outsizes the entire United Kingdom on their own. One state alone measures out to roughly 7 times the size of England. Even a single county-level chunk of land, San Bernardino in California, dwarfs Northern Ireland by a factor of 4. Step inside America's national park system, and you'll find protected wilderness alone that outsizes the whole of England put together. Europeans take enormous pride in their history, while Americans simply take ownership of the space itself. There's an old saying that captures it perfectly. In England, 100 meters counts as a serious distance, while in America, 100 years barely qualifies as real history. Out here, You can floor it for hours through untouched wilderness without seeing another living soul. Honestly, I still can't wrap my brain around how big this country is. A childhood friend of mine relocated out to Long Beach, near New York, and we were catching up one morning over the phone. I said, "It's 5 in the morning." And he goes, "No, it isn't. It's 9. I said, "What are you talking about?" And he told me there's a full 3-hour time gap between San Diego and New York, inside the exact same country. How does one nation stretch across that many clocks? He mentioned the flight from San Diego to New York eats up 7 hours, the same stretch of time it takes to fly back from New York to London. This whole country just refuses to make sense in my head. It's massive beyond reason. There's endlessly more of it to see. Let's dive in. Put it this way, across 6 days here, we clocked 850 miles in the rental car. The entire length of the United Kingdom, top to bottom, is only 362 miles. Just sit with that for a second. My God. It's an almost impossible feeling to process when you've grown up inside Europe's tightly packed borders. One single nation contains all 6 of its own time zones. Driving from one state into the next can feel like landing on an entirely different planet. Brits genuinely do not grasp the scale here. I flew back from America 3 days ago, and another Brit at the airport actually asked me, "So how was all of America? Did you get to see it? Did you see the whole thing?" I don't think people back home have any concept of how big this country truly is. For anyone watching from the UK, America runs on 6 separate time zones. The UK runs on exactly 1, and it's made up of 4 separate countries crammed together. You can drive across Texas for 11 straight hours and still be inside Texas. There's nothing remotely comparable to that back home. Americans will happily drive 2 hours just to get to work. Americans will drive 2 hours just to grab dinner. I genuinely don't think Brits can comprehend the raw scale of this place until they physically stood inside it. I still haven't seen all of America myself. It took me 3 entire weeks just to get through Louisiana, and Louisiana isn't even considered one of the big ones. Have I seen the whole country? There are 50 states. It blows my mind every time someone back home asks, "Oh, so you've basically seen all of America then, after traveling around for 2 years?" No. No, I have not seen the whole of America. It's going to take me a very long time before I even come close. This country is on an entirely different scale. America never really behaved like a normal, single nation to begin with. It was always a continent wearing the disguise of one country. And the second these tourists land back home and glance at the narrow, ancient streets of their own hometowns, the realization hits like a slap. Their 1,000-year-old civilization suddenly looks laughably small and naive. If Texas broke off and became its own country tomorrow, do you think drivers would need to carry a passport just to get from one end of the state to the other? Between spending a full driving day crossing 7 European borders with checkpoints versus flooring it across Texas without stopping once, which route burns through more sleep-deprived gas station coffee? But the raw landmass was only the opening act of the shock. Curious how Americans took all that overwhelming empty space and poured it into giant concrete cathedrals built purely to hold people? Walk into a stadium anywhere in Europe, and you'll swear you're standing at the absolute summit of world football. Then you land in America, and suddenly, those same Premier League and Champions League cathedrals shrink down into pitiful little scale models. Here's the harsh reality. The United States has at least 8 college football stadiums alone that seat more than 100,000 spectators. Sit with that for a second. College football, built for literal students, outscales the wealthiest professional clubs on the entire old continent. The international brain genuinely struggles to process our NFL stadiums. But here's the real punchline. Those aren't even the biggest ones we've got. Not even close. For context, Every stadium hosting the World Cup seats around 70,000 people. Meanwhile, we've got 8 college football stadiums alone that each seat over 100,000. These venues are so enormous that even an American mind, mine specifically, struggles to fully process the size, the scale, the raw sound coming off the crowd. I went to Tiger Stadium at LSU a couple years back, which holds somewhere around 100,000 people. And I am not exaggerating when I say it physically took my breath away. It was that overwhelming. And that's not even the biggest one out there. The single largest stadium in the entire country, drumroll, is the Big House at Michigan. This place seats 107,000 people, and there's never a single empty seat in the building. Not one. Picture cramming the entire population of a small European city into one grandstand. Then imagine that happening again every single week without fail. But scale isn't even the whole story here. What actually stops European tourists in their tracks is the science fiction-grade technology and architecture wrapped around all of it. Stadiums like SoFi or AT&T Stadium look more like spacecraft that touch down on the ground than sporting venues. You step in from 35-degree heat outside, and inside it's refrigerator cold thanks to industrial air conditioning. Retractable roofs, paired with LED screens the size of an entire building, turn every single game into a full-blown tech spectacle. While European stadiums get squeezed awkwardly into crowded residential neighborhoods, Americans build these things out in wide open land, turning them into all-day event centers in their own right. Our news crew was set up just down the road from this massive pre-match party happening outside the stadium, so I wandered down to check it out, and I've genuinely never seen anything like it before a soccer match. Thousands of people just hanging out, fireworks going off randomly, campers pulling straight into the grass lot, people grilling out, people selling food. Look at this, full grills fired up in a parking lot. I had the exact same reaction the second I smelled that meat. Like, that looks incredible. Total Kansas City energy right there. Between the tailgating culture and the sheer scale of a Super Bowl halftime show, Americans aren't just selling you a 90-minute match. They're selling an entire extravagant fantasy. As 100,000 voices roar from the stands, Europeans quietly realize their own hometown sporting pride has shrunk down into something almost embarrassing by comparison. If you screamed at the top of your lungs inside a 107,000-seat stadium in Michigan, would the guy in the back row even hear your stomach growling under that retractable roof, those massive screens, and all that overhead air conditioning? Do these American super stadiums read more like spaceships or entire miniature cities? But how exactly do Americans manage to fill 100,000 seats like that, weekend after weekend? Get ready to have your entire concept of nearby completely demolished. Europeans measure distance by national borders. Americans measure it by however many hours they're willing to sit on a highway. That mental shift alone floors people from the old continent the second they land on American soil. In England or Germany, a 1,000-mile trip is treated like a full-blown expedition, requiring a week of planning. In America, that same distance is just the morning commute, or the drive over to a friend's place to hang out. Someone needs to explain this to me, because back in England, this would sound insane. I keep seeing Americans casually mention driving 2 hours to the gym like it's absolutely nothing. In England, a 15-minute drive already counts as a genuinely long trip. You lot will drive 3 hours and call that nothing at all. If we drove 3 hours in the UK, we'd have basically crossed the entire country. You guys are just wired differently when it comes to driving. So be honest, how many of you are logging 2-3 hours behind the wheel every single day, maybe more? What's your normal daily driving distance? Be honest with me here. Back in the UK, this concept is genuinely shocking to people. When I casually mention doing a 3-hour drive like it's nothing, because I live like an American now, people look at me like I just insulted their mother. You know what I mean? Nobody in the UK is used to that. It's completely unfathomable. Unfathomable. Americans, what's your typical daily driving distance? Let's properly shock all our British friends with this one. The European brain simply short-circuits watching an American casually drive 2 or 3 hours just for a gym session or dinner, then cruise back home that same night like it was nothing at all. For them, 30 minutes in the car doesn't even register as a real trip. It's basically next door. Maybe the single most defeating moment for a European tourist is flooring the gas pedal for a solid 7 hours straight, only to look at the map and realize they're still somehow trapped inside the borders of Florida. Forget Europe's convenient rail network entirely. Out here, the car is the ultimate symbol of freedom. The road trip mentality is baked straight into the American bloodstream. Rather than hopping a flight to another country for summer break the way Europeans typically do, Americans will happily pack the car and drive thousands of miles straight through untouched desert. The absolute peak of absurdity, though, is in the sky. A domestic flight from San Diego on the West Coast to New York on the East Coast runs up to 7 hours. The exact same amount of time it takes to lift off from New York and land clear across the Atlantic in London. And then, these same travelers land back home and realize they could drive the full length of their own country in a single afternoon. America's scale has turned the entire concept of a road trip back home into little more than a kid's game. Would you rather burn 3 hours in the car just for a proper burger, or open up a delivery app for something healthier instead? If an hour behind the wheel counts as right next door in the States, would that same hour even be enough time to clear border control into a neighboring European country? But to actually support all these absurd, drawn-out journeys, just how massive does America's underlying infrastructure have to be? If you think Europe's cobblestone streets or its cramped rail systems represent the peak of civilized travel, American road infrastructure will shatter that idea instantly. Nothing out here is designed with the human pedestrian in mind. It's built entirely to serve machines. The first thing that hits a tourist right in the eyes is a 14-lane boulevard, 7 lanes running in each direction, stretched so wide your eyesight can barely register the curb on the far side. At the busiest interchanges, layers of overlapping highway ramps twist together like something ripped straight out of a video game. Sidewalks have all but vanished in a huge number of American cities. Someone actually walking down the street becomes a strange, almost suspicious sight, since the entire landscape has been swallowed by parking lots large enough to hold an army. That same obsession with scale shows up at every rest stop along the way too. Forget Europe's cramped little petrol stations. Step into one of America's mega travel stop chains instead. A genuine sanctuary with hundreds of fuel pumps running at once, attached to a retail floor bigger than most town supermarkets. Americans have turned the entire driving experience into pure convenience. Paying for gas without ever leaving your seat, driverless robo-taxis cruising the streets with nobody behind the wheel, and highway signage blown up to the size of a small apartment so drivers can actually read it while flying past at triple-digit speeds. Landing back home and staring at their narrow, twisting old streets with zero available parking, European tourists realize their home infrastructure is nothing but a scale model next to this transportation monster. On a 14-lane highway running at full speed, are you confident you could merge from the innermost lane all the way over to your exit without a small breakdown? The first time you climb into a fully autonomous, driverless taxi, does it feel thrilling, like stepping into the future, or unsettling, like the car might just take off with you? But out on those endless highways, in the constant churn of traffic, exactly how enormous are the retail outposts Americans built to stop, spend money, and restock? If you thought a European grocery store was big, brace yourself for total sensory overload the moment you walk into an American retail warehouse. For visitors from the old continent, these aren't simple shopping trips. They're entire planets where excess has been turned into a genuine philosophy of life. Take Costco or Walmart as the obvious example. These hypermarkets have floor space larger than entire quiet countryside towns plenty of Europeans call home. It can take a full 10 minutes just to walk from your parking spot to the front doors. And once you're inside, plenty of tourists straight up get lost. You'll find a washing machine sitting right next to the fresh bread counter, or wander into an outdoor gear megastore built like a full nature museum, complete with an artificial waterfall and a genuinely massive aquarium. But the size of the building itself is nothing compared to the size of what's sitting on the shelves. Europeans go grocery shopping for a litre of milk at a time, while Americans haul home containers holding nearly 4 litres. Picture crates of pickles roughly the size of a motorcycle's fuel tank, slabs of beef weighing a full kilogram staring you in the face, or aisles stretching on for what feels like miles just to show off a few hundred variations of soda. Everything here runs on a supersized scale by default. Some grocery chains even build little taps into their shopping carts so customers can sip a cold beer while they push their cart around leisurely. Landing back home and walking into the cramped little grocery stores of Europe, it hits hard. What used to feel like a perfectly reasonable standard suddenly reads like a punchline about scarcity. If you got hopelessly lost inside a Costco the size of an actual town, would you camp out and wait for rescue near the frozen food aisle or near the candy section? Is a 4-litre jar of pickles enough to last a lifetime, or barely enough to survive a single American-style weekend cookout? But those giant jars and slabs of meat are only the raw ingredients. Once the food actually hits the plate, how does an American meal redefine what enough even means for a European? America simply doesn't recognize the phrase, just enough, especially not at a restaurant counter. An American meal isn't just fuel, it's a genuine test of how much your stomach can physically hold. And it stuns European travelers used to portions built around elegance and restraint. The very first shock lands the moment you order a drink. Tourists walk into a fast food spot, politely ask for a medium glass of water, and get handed something closer to a bucket the size of an actual human head. That much water could keep an entire European family hydrated for a solid month. But the truly wild part is the free refill culture. Back in France or England, you're paying for every single glass of water, every drop of ketchup, while in America, you can refill that same soda 1,000 times over, completely free of charge. That level of generosity completely rewires the consumer instincts of anyone raised on the old continent. Once the main plate lands, the excess just keeps hammering your senses. Onions the size of a fist, pancakes as wide as a serving platter, big enough for 2 grown adults to be defeated by, or Texas-sized steaks weighing in at a full 20 ounces staring you down. Even the menu at certain restaurant chains reads like a full novel, paired with pasta portions so massive that guests are forced to box up half of it just to get it out the door. Back home, staring down their own tiny plates and modest water glasses, Europeans bitterly realize their own culinary standards now look both arrogant and stingy, practically a joke about being cheap. Would an XL cup of American ice water actually double as a flotation device for a kid at the pool? Between refilling your soda 10 times just to feel like you got your money's worth, or stopping halfway through to protect your blood sugar, which one are you actually choosing? But that same supersized mentality doesn't stop at the dinner table or inside the grocery store. Step out onto the street and take a look at the metal giants rolling through American traffic. Drive a compact hatchback through London or Paris and you'll feel right at home, perfectly sized for the street. Drop that same tiny car into American traffic though, and you'll immediately feel choked out by the sheer presence of these rolling steel beasts. The trucks dominating American roads aren't ordinary vehicles, they're genuine mobile fortresses. Giant pickups like the Ford F-150 and Ram trucks show up absolutely everywhere, and Americans will happily drive them just to grab a couple gallons of milk from the store. But bring one of those F-150s over to Europe, and it could block both lanes of some tiny English village and paralyze traffic for the whole street. Part of that mechanical draw comes straight from the roar of a full V8 engine block. From gleaming chrome fire trucks that look ripped straight out of a Hollywood set, to oversized yellow school buses that plenty of European tourists genuinely thought only existed in cartoons, right down to strange, angular steel machines like the Cybertruck rolling freely down the road, American streets end up feeling like an actual science fiction film set. Thanks to just how much space is available, Americans can park 6-meter-long vehicles with interiors roomy enough to rival a living room sofa, all without breaking a sweat. Then, these same tourists land back home, stare at their narrow streets and tiny matchbox-sized cars, and are stunned to realize their own modest, compact standard suddenly reads as a pathetic joke next to America's mechanical muscle. Would you rather drive something small and nimble through tight alleyways, or a rolling fortress with enough room for the whole family and a cow to boot? If a full-sized yellow American school bus suddenly rolled onto your street back home, do you think it would take out the nearest pedestrian bridge? Setting aside the geography and the record-breaking numbers, the biggest shock that completely rearranges European thinking comes from the sheer scale of the American spirit and heart. Contrary to the cold, standoffish image the old continent's media often paints, Americans greet the world with a warmth so enormous it's genuinely disarming. British tourists are floored the moment a total stranger in a supermarket calls them sweetie or honey without a second thought. That Southern-style warmth and thoughtfulness, all those polite yes sir and no sir moments, or a total stranger cheerfully spending 10 minutes helping you track down a single item, make Europe's usual reserved private culture feel worlds away by comparison. But maybe the most striking symbol of it all is the flag itself, flying everywhere from rooftops to car dealership lots, hoisted on poles reaching 60 meters high and stretched out over 100 square meters in size. That patriotic energy doesn't feel manufactured. It genuinely runs bone deep, especially in the atmosphere surrounding the recent 250th anniversary of the country's founding. The image of millions of people placing a hand over their heart in unison, honoring every single veteran, or strangers embracing each other in the street celebrating together, proves one simple thing. America isn't just enormous in land area. It carries an almost overwhelming level of pride and unity. Landing back home and reflecting on their homeland's reserve, isolation, and old lingering doubts, Europeans are stunned to realize their 1,000-year-old civilization isn't just physically small. Sometimes it feels genuinely cramped next to the sheer size of this country's heart. How does it feel getting called sweetheart by a total stranger in the middle of a grocery store? Embarrassing, heartwarming, or like you just shaved a decade off your age? After crossing endless straight highways, walking through 100,000-seat sporting cathedrals, staring down absurd food portions, and standing inside all that patriotic fire, Europeans are forced to accept a hard truth. America was never a single country to begin with. It's an entire universe wearing one flag. Landing back on the quiet, tight little streets of the old continent, that overwhelming feeling slowly settles into something more reflective. America may make Europe look like a punchline in terms of raw scale, but it's exactly that smallness, that attention to detail, and that 1,000-year history that gives Europe its actual soul. Small or enormous, frugal or excessive. So what's the standard of living you'd actually choose for yourself? Would you take the vastness, the total freedom, and the pressure that comes with American-style scale, or the quiet, compact, deeply layered atmosphere of European life? Please note that this video is compiled from personal experiences, general geographic figures, and a mix of cultural perspectives shared for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as official fact, does not represent the experience of every traveler or every country involved, and viewers are encouraged to verify any specific claims independently. Nothing here is meant to attack, belittle, or discriminate against any nation, ethnicity, or individual.